And rights aren't rights if someone can take them away. They're privileges. That's all we've ever had in this country is a bill of temporary privileges. And if you read the news even badly, you know that every year the list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. You see how sooner or later?
Copenhagen was, I think, a first step, but we need many more steps in the future. And we as European Union will pursue with our ambition. The European Union's commitments will be delivered. That will not change. Our commitments are not just words in press releases. They are binding for all European Union member states. Where to be, and I am trying to be because I think we have to be honest in the assessment and objective in the assessment, where we were disappointed was in the fact that in spite of accepting the reference to 2 degrees Celsius as the maximum acceptable in terms of temperature rise, it was not agreed by our main partners to have a reference to the reduction of 50% by 2050. Coming to the developing countries, they make sometimes very interesting pledges, but also there is here the point that, you know, it's a very important point for them. They do not accept the principle of putting them in an international binding agreement.
Day 2 of the climate talks here, and the heat is on at the Bella Center. Of course, the focus will be on the United States that has apparently made some pronouncements. Despite the grey weather in Copenhagen, some relief from the United States, the U.S. was promising action. Jonathan Patching, Deputy Special Envoy for Climate Change, says U.S. is committed to the strongest possible outcome.
The world community has here in Copenhagen the opportunity to reach a deal that could move us much more aggressively down the path to meeting one of mankind's greatest challenges.
Sentiments shared by former President Bill Clinton, who hopes that delegates at the climate summit don't lose sight of the economic benefits that a deal would bring.
I hope it will be as specific as possible, and I hope that there'll be enough people there with the kind of experience that I've done now in my climate change work to say this can be good economics. This is being sold as a dose of castor oil you have to swallow. And it's just not true. If we change the way we produce and consume energy, it opens up a whole new vista for the developed nations.
The good news came as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency formally declared that greenhouse gases endanger human health. The ruling applies to 6 gases many scientists say contribute to global warming, including the main one, carbon dioxide. EPA ruling allows the agency to regulate greenhouse gases even without any action from the U.S. Congress. Business groups, including the National Association of Manufacturers, say the move, which could allow regulation of gases from vehicle tailpipes or smokestacks, would hurt the economy, just as the country is emerging from a deep recession. But the administration and some analysts maintain the decision would ultimately benefit American industry. President Barack Obama plans to attend the UN Climate Change Conference late next week, but he has not mastered the votes to pass a climate change bill in Congress. Analysts say the EPA decision gives him something to bring to Copenhagen.
The floods in Cumbria, a 1,000-year event. But you see, if you take 100 different microclimates which exist in Britain, and there are 10 different climatic extreme events that could happen in each one, you're going to get a 1,000-year event once a year. These extreme weather events come around just as they always have. In any chaotic object, mathematically speaking, you would expect this to happen. It tells us nothing about whether the world is steadily warming. Yes, it has been warming for 300 years, during 280 of which we couldn't have had anything to do with it. And the Antarctic ice cap is expanding. The sea ice in the Antarctic reached a record extent in 2007, 3 weeks after the record minimum in the Arctic. There was a record maximum in the Antarctic.
The IPCC has a huge body of seemingly solid scientific evidence behind it, and they say that it's 90% likely that climate change is man-made. How do you refute that?
There is no scientific basis whatsoever for saying there is a 90% probability that most of the warming of the last 50 years was caused by humankind. None whatsoever. You could go, for instance, to a paper by Scafetta and West just last year, saying that 69% of all the warming of the last 50 years was caused by the sun. I'm not entirely convinced by that argument either. The fact is we have no means of knowing what are the influences that cause the climate to fluctuate in the short term, upwards or downwards. This is simply beyond our capacity to measure or analyze. What we do know, and this we can do by laboratory experiment and by a little bit of elementary mathematics, is what the maximum possible effect of adding CO2 to the atmosphere can be. And the answer is it's very, very, very small.
Even if climate change theory hasn't been entirely put to the test, isn't it better to do something now rather than wait for flooding, drought and temperature rises?
The precautions themselves, let us say, in the shape of replacing 1/3 of the world's agricultural land, which grew food, with growing biofuels instead. So we were once growing food for people that needed it. Now we grow biofuels for clunkers that don't. Result? A doubling of world food prices in just over a year. 3/4 of which was attributed by the World Bank to this biofuel scam, which comes out of the global warming scare. Result? If we have to pay twice as much for our food, it's inconvenient. If you're in a poor country, that difference of 100% in the price of your food is the difference between life and death.
Well, the significance is that it confirms suspicions that I've had in my 30 years of working in climate science, that I saw the hijacking of climate science, particularly by computer modelers, and then by a small group of people associated with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. But of course, the difficulty was that even though I sensed that there were these things going on, proving it is extremely difficult. But now, suddenly, with the exposure of these files, it's not only a smoking gun, it's a battery of machine guns that has been exposed. And it really is deeply disturbing, because what you've got here is confirmation of this small group of scientists who, by the way, Professor Wegman, who was asked to arbitrate in the debate about the hockey stick, he identified 42 people and said, look, these people are all publishing together, and they're also peer reviewing each other's literature. So there's a classic example of the kind of thing that bothered me. About 20 years ago, I started saying, well, why are they pushing the peer review issue so big? Why are they saying, well, you haven't published peer review and you haven't done this peer review? And now, of course, we realize is because they had control of their own process, and that's clearly exposed in these emails. So for me, it is just confirmation of very deep suspicions I've had, but on a global scale, it's frightening, because this group of people not only controlled the Hadley Center, which controls the data, global data on temperature through the Hadley Climate Research Unit. So the global temperature record is in their hands, but they also control the IPCC.
Humans produce a small fraction in the single digits percentage-wise of the CO2 that is produced in the atmosphere.
Volcanoes produce more CO2 each year than all the factories and cars and planes and other sources of man-made carbon dioxide put together. More still comes from animals and bacteria, which produce about 150 gigatons of CO2 each year, compared to a mere 6.5 gigatons from humans. An even larger source of CO2 is dying vegetation, from falling leaves, for example, in the autumn. But the biggest source of CO2 by far is the oceans.